This day I set before you blessing and curse. Blessing, if you obey the commandments of the Lord your God that I enjoin upon you this day, and curse, if you do not obey the commandments of the Lord your God. These are the opening words of our parasha this week, Re'eh. It all seems so simple. You make a choice, door number 1 or door number 2. You know which is which before you open the door. It's not a surprise. But we've all lived some life. We know it's more complicated than that when the rubber hits the road. This past Sunday in our community, there was a funeral. We remembered and celebrated the life of Miriam Feldman, known to all as Mickey, who passed away at the age of 95, surrounded by her children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and even 2 great-great-grandchildren. Hers was a full life, a life well lived, a life of blessing. But in some ways, it was a bit more complicated than that. Mickey and her husband Arnie were members of Temple Beth Torah. And for those of us here who are not yet familiar with Temple Beth Torah, let me introduce you to a bit of Adat Shalom history. Temple Beth Torah was a synagogue nearby that merged into Adat Shalom a number of years ago. Mickey and Arnie were very active members of that community. And when the 2 communities merged, they were very active in helping the 2 communities integrate and combine. Financial well-being was also something that Mickey and Arnie valued very much, and they brought this value to their Temple Beth Torah community, helping to raise funds to make sure that they own their building free and clear. When Temple Beth Torah merged with Adat Shalom, they brought financial resources, and these resources are strategically and expertly managed, continuing to support our community to this day. But most of all, Mickey and Arnie were in love. They had a strong family, raising 3 children who all went to USC, for all you sports fans out there and for our Torah reader. And in Mickey and Arnie's retirement, they went everywhere together, doing everything together. Mickey and Arnie lived a life of blessing. Yet sadly, tragically, Arnie died 16 years ago. Some of us in our community still remember when it happened, still remember what it was like when it happened. And at Mickey's funeral, celebrating her long and full life, her many descendants, and her close and loving family, we could not help but remember Arnie's passing and how different it was, how different that funeral 16 years ago was. Our Torah portion makes it seem simple. We choose blessing or curse, but we've lived life. We know it's more complicated than that. Now, of course, we're approaching the high holidays. This is on everyone's mind. This is the rhythm of Jewish life. Kids go back to school. We start making plans for our Labor Day end of summer celebrations. We know that this time is approaching. If we attend services on the weekdays, we'll start to hear the sounding of the shofar every day on the month of Elul, every day except for the day immediately before Rosh Hashanah. Summer's coming to an end. Therefore, our season for spiritual reflection has begun. And this season is a gift. This season is such a gift. And I'm telling this all now because it might not feel so much like a gift when we're in Rosh Hashanah services, swimming through a choppy sea of confusing and lengthy prayers. It might not feel so much like a gift when we're worried whether we'll feel okay when we fast, or when we're hungry and thirsty on Yom Kippur afternoon, or when we're heading home from Kol Nidre to the rest of the day ahead. But this season really is a gift, and here's why. It's because we do it all together. We do it all together. There are lots of religious practices. There are lots of spiritual traditions that have a structure for repentance, for taking stock of one's life and returning to the right path. I'm not an expert in world religions, but I do know that in Catholicism, there's a practice of confession, of revealing one's sins and finding forgiveness. I know that in 12-step recovery, there's a heartfelt process of coming to honesty with oneself, coming to honesty with others, and humbly asking for forgiveness, knowing it might never be granted. But in Judaism, it's different. It's different because we do it once a year, every year, at the same time each year, the same time on the Jewish calendar, that is, and we all do it together. No matter who you are, no matter what your year has been like, you, along with all of us, take a pause. We remember we're not perfect, and we ask for forgiveness. Not only that, we ask forgiveness first from our fellow human beings, from the actual people in our lives, and then after that, we ask forgiveness from God. Our tradition teaches that really we can't ask forgiveness from God if we don't first ask forgiveness from people, from those in our lives who we might have offended, those in our lives who we probably did offend, and probably not even on purpose, but instead by accident. The point being, we go to one another first. We find a way to make things right, and only after that do we go to God. I have a teacher and a friend, Rabbi Iggy Guren Malou, who would tell me, and even though I never saw him do it himself, I know it's true, how seriously he would take this mitzvah. Weeks before Rosh Hashanah, he would review his year, scouring for any moments for which he needed to take responsibility, making sure there were no apologies left with balance owed. And although I did not grow up with this myself because I didn't grow up in a religious family, I eventually came to become familiar with the custom of forgiving our friends and family, Erev Yontif, of having those conversations in person or over the phone right before the Seudah Mafseket, the meal before the Yom Kippur fast begins. These conversations weren't always as thought through as those described by my friend and teacher, Rabbi Iggy, but they were every bit as heartfelt. I'm sorry. I forgive you. Especially since I didn't grow up with these conversations, I really have an appreciation for how they bring us closer. Even when we don't, or even when we can't, do a line-by-line accounting of how precisely we messed up and what exactly the dollars and cents value of our error, I see how apologizing can bring us closer. And I see how forgiving, even when we're not 100% clear on what we're granting forgiveness for, can still be healing, can be revitalizing. This is the power of apologizing, and this is the power of forgiveness. And this is how the practice, the commandment, of observance of our high holidays can bring us into relationship, can help us stay in relationship, even when times are tough, even when the people we're in relationship with aren't exactly perfect. And so, okay, we're not exactly perfect. None of us is exactly perfect. All of us make mistakes. But most of us, maybe even in this community, all of us, are pretty good. We strive to do the right thing, and a good amount of the time we succeed. Sometimes we mess up and our mistakes do harm others. But most of the time, we make the choices we should be making. We follow the path of blessing. So, why, when we're trying to do the right thing, why do bad things happen? I was discussing this question with a group from our community just the other day. One person made the point that sometimes when a bad thing happens to a person, that person or the people around them will look at the circumstances of their life and try to figure out what the bad thing was that this unfortunate person did that may have caused a bad thing to happen to that person in their life. I appreciated very much that this point came up. I think most of us, even maybe all of us, have had our moments of doing this with our own life or with the lives of others. We're drawn in like moths to a flame by the simplicity of this outlook. We think if something bad happens to us, it must be our own fault. We must have brought it upon ourselves somehow. We rack our brains trying to figure out what it is we did, or we look at our friend or the person in our family, and we try to figure out what it is they must have done. The simplicity, the black and white thinking, it's attractive. We want it to make sense. But we've lived life. We know it's more complicated than that. We know that sometimes two people, like the members of our community, Arnie and Mickey Feldman, can join together and live a life of true blessing. But that doesn't guarantee any particular outcome. In other words, just because you live a perfect life doesn't mean you'll have a perfect life. In our Jewish Bible, our Tanakh, buried in the back somewhere in a place where we don't often read, is the book of Job. It tells the story of a man, a good man. He doesn't do anything wrong. He lives life just as he should. And he encounters unspeakable tragedy. He turns to his friends who aren't of much help or comfort. But eventually, in this story, God shows up. Specifically, chapter 38, verse 1. God responds to Job, speaking out of the tempest, and God says, "Job, where were you when I laid the earth's foundations, when I fixed its dimensions? Where were you when I unleashed the sea from its womb and then said, come here and stop here no farther. Here your surging waves will stop. Job, have the gates of death been disclosed to you? Have you seen the gates of deep darkness and it surveyed the expanses of the earth? If you know any of this, Job, go ahead and say so. The challenge and the great adventure of life is that we don't get how this all works. That's exactly the point. We don't know why two good people can meet such different ends. We're never going to be able to completely figure it out. But the promise of our high holidays, the gift of our high holidays, is that they can help us fathom this unfathomable truth. And when we do this, we don't have to stop at a place of acceptance, of coming to terms of it is what it is. We can transcend acceptance. We can begin to feel awe. We can fathom the earth's foundations and dimensions. We can marvel at the power and the boundaries of the sea. We can contemplate the gates of death and darkness. And instead of saying to ourselves, it is what it is, we can instead say to ourselves, what an amazing blessing it is to be in this reality, in this fragility, to have these moments with one another and ourselves. When we breathe in the air, we look at things that are beautiful and we feel emotion. We can understand, maybe for just an instant at a time, that getting to experience life is in fact the whole point. We can transcend acceptance, and we can begin to receive this special gift. As we finish our Shabbat together and we move to the month of Elul, may we be blessed with both acceptance and awe. May we find acceptance of our limitations, of life's limitations, and may we find awe as we breathe in the beauty all around us and we find connection with ourselves and one another. Shabbat Shalom.